Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the Teams meeting today. I know the governor is also having a press conference at 3. Doesn't look like it's starting yet, but you have permission to turn that on in the background or as needed. I'm not sure what he's going to say, but for me, having to write a weekly memo every Monday, for those of you that following it, some weeks are certainly better than the other. I think the fluff and under sandwich one might have been a total whopper, but I love those sandwiches. But on Monday, in a moment of writer's block, I promised you, my coworkers, a plan for OJA, and I promised you a meeting today. And my goal to always be honest and transparent and keep my word puts us here today. I had hoped for the governor and OMS to give us directives this week. They gave us some we received them, I saw them about 240 today. So close to what we have already put forward to you. The top thing from OMS is that agency directors have a lot of discretion on what is best for our agency. So the plan that we shared with you today, and that is a preliminary plan and a plan that is open to continuously be updated and changed as our agency needs change and as the health of our state and our nation change. But there were a lot of common questions being asked last week and this week, and so I wanted to give you some answers, and I wanted to give you some written answers so that they were consistent from the agency. So my thanks to Paula Christensen, who created this PowerPoint for me to guide you through it. So we're going to just go through it real quick. If you have questions, chat them to Len, and Len, you can use your discretion whether to interrupt me in the middle of it or whether to do them at the end. And then I have a few words, and also I have some questions that I got through that email that I'm going to answer too. All right, so let's go. So our Open Up and Recovery Plan. There we go. So the Oklahoma plan, I don't know if you've all had a chance to see that, but that's based on modeling and to mitigate resurgence and to protect Oklahomans, but also to get people back to work and our economy back to work. And there's a link there for you to go look at that. Have you not seen it yet? But as of the writing of this document, we didn't have any guidance. We since have some guidance, but it gives agency directors a lot of discretion. And so I will continue, as long as I'm interim director, to use my discretion to try to keep us safe and keep us doing the job that we are paid to do for the state of Oklahoma. So telework, you know, when this all first started, we were told by OMS, by the governor, by health experts, to get everybody that we could to telework. And I was so proud of our agency and how fast we were able to adopt a temporary telework policy and to get approximately 300 of our workers to telework agreements. And I know a lot of people were not enthusiastic about telework, but I'm real pleased by the outcome and the work product that has come out of those telework assignments. And I think people are adjusting to that telework reality, so much to the point that now they're not wanting to return to the office. So those original telework agreements, when we entered those, they were temporary telework agreements, and they were put together in response to this pandemic. And they had an expiration date of May 15th, a date that we just kind of picked out of a hat, but is upon us in 2 weeks. And so I have asked that every supervisor that has an employee on telework to, between May 1st and May 15th, review that telework agreement with them, go over again what the plan is, what their duties are, and how they've been doing on that telework agreement, and if there's any problems or issues, to address it during that meeting. I hope that those telework agreements will then be extended through June 30th. But in the new directives we got from OMS, the directors have discretion, and we are able to open offices as needed. So if supervisors are having issues with work products, or if our employees are not holding up their end of telework agreements, and during this meeting, there's not an agreement made or an ability to come into compliance with your work expectations, then those telework agreements may not be extended. This will be case by case. I ask that supervisors that are having issues with some employees, if you have those telework agreements sooner, earlier in that, to May 1st to tomorrow or early next week. And if you're having issues, maybe address them and give the employees a week to correct those and have the ability to extend those. Of course, if there's health or family circumstances that will not allow you to telework, that will also be considered. But at this point, we're going to be trying to remain on telework as much as possible. That's also one of the directives that OMS has continued to ask us to do. This is just continued on telework. For those of you, I know that you yourself are vulnerable, you have vulnerable family members at home, or like me, I have an 8 and 10-year-old at home now, which makes it nice to be at the office today. So, but we understand traditional telework isn't supposed to be used in order to stay home with kids, but under our temporary telework policy and agreements, that is something that is allowable or accepted or given grace because it's not a circumstance you can control. The residential placement support plan, Carol Miller, Deputy Director, she will be in charge of this plan for Kojak and Swojak. She will work with the superintendents on the ground in what is best for the facility. And I will look to her to lead that. I will look for input from superintendents on what is going to be best for their facility. Those workers at Kojak and Swojak, I have deemed them essential and critical to our infrastructure because they are. They are not able to telework. They are required to be there every day to continue to do the job, to keep our kids safe, to keep our kids getting treatment and moving forward in their progress. And they have done excellent work doing that. And so because those kids are able to stay secure and we're not allowing them to go to passes and coming back, and because we've stopped visits, and we've been able to keep that facility healthy. And I appreciate the employees doing, taking care of themselves and submitting to those temperature checks to keep that facility safe. So we will not do anything to jeopardize the health and safety of those facilities and keeping everyone COVID-free in there. So, but Carol Miller, I'll go to the next slide too. Carol Miller will be the one guiding this plan with the superintendents, and I will look to her and not do anything that everyone doesn't feel safe about. The OYACs, our charter school at Swojak and Kojak, those teachers were out on spring break when this all kind of hit the fan. And so was a decision made that they would remain at home. They started on telework agreements. They started working on remote planning and lessons and got geared up for that April 6th date when the State Department of Ed allowed all students in Oklahoma to have remote distancing learning. And that's what we started on April 6th in those two centers, and it's going well, and kids are getting education. Our kids are probably certainly getting more and better education than the majority of kids in the state. Certainly the 2 kids that live at my house are not getting the depth of education that my kids at Swojak and Kojak are getting. But that will continue. Our Director of Education, Melissa White, has set a goal of June 1 to get the teachers and staff back into the facility. But that's a goal today on April 30th. The goal is June 1st. We will continue to monitor that and see how the facilities are doing, how each facility is doing, and how our state and nation are doing on COVID numbers. Leave. So don't forget to take leave. Don't forget to take time off, to take a break. For me, I know I've talked to people, when I sit at that computer all day and I'm on 5 different teams and 3 different phone calls and webinars, and I forget to take breaks, and some days I forget to eat lunch, and then, it's a lot. But I have announced that I will be taking tomorrow afternoon off. I'll be taking leave tomorrow afternoon. I'll still, of course, have my phone, but I recognize that I have not taken leave since this started, and so I need to take leave, and I encourage you all to remember to take your leave. I'm going to go ahead and call out Carol Miller on this. She took last Tuesday off to ride her horses, and that has rejuvenated and restored her. And if she'll want to share with you later, she'll tell you that that was needed and necessary. So please don't forget to take care of yourself and take your leave. And of course, if you're sick or have doctor's appointments, don't forget to take your sick leave as required. So on the offices, I think this was the question that I had hoped to answer, hope for guidance. We now have some guidance. Again, directors have discretion, and we still want the majority of our workers to remain on telework status. Our offices will still remain closed to the public. Visits in the offices will still remain suspended. But we've gotten a little more directives from OMS, and we are going to work on plans, working with our district supervisors and district supervisor and JSU staff on how to safely open those offices back up, how and when. Shelley Waller already sent me some draft language of how to do visits safely with families, and so that will come out in the next round of recommendations. But for now, we're going to keep closed till at least May 15th. Courts, so all the courthouses are closed through May 15th, but county commissioners are being able to decide how to open those courthouses. So for each worker in each county, you'll have to look to directions from your judges on how they're going to do their dockets. I think some are still going to continue to do it remotely. I ask that if you do have to appear in court, that you take your precautions on social distancing and hand washing and mask wearing. And you can still be on telework status and, from your home and go to court and go back. You don't have to come back to an office status in order to attend court. Visitations will continue to be suspended at Kojak and Swojak. And right now, I believe they're continuing to be suspended at our contracted detention centers and Level E homes. But in order to keep that going, we have to always remember that we have to increase our virtual visits and telephone calls between the kids and their families. We have to allow the kids access to lawyers and mentors and clergy. And, the more access we're able to give virtually, the less pressure we'll have to go back to face-to-face. I will say, I don't know if you're all reading, I read a national story every few days of different states, mainly larger states, California and New York, where they're not, visitation phone calls actually cost money for families. Families aren't able to afford to do the phone calls, and they're not able to make the phone calls. And so I'm really proud of Oklahoma that we, at all levels, do not require payment for phone calls. And especially at Swojak and Kojak and our contracted homes, we've increased those virtual visits for kids to feel connected to their families. And I have not, maybe you have, I've not fielded any phone calls from angry parents yet, touching wood, about not being able to see or talk to their kids. Leave for COVID-19, this was a question, what kind of leave do you take if you're exposed or if a family member is exposed or you think you're exposed? That is I tried to answer as best I could. This answer is crafted by Paula Tillison along with our Attorney General, Matt Stengel, and it's really going to be case by case. But if you feel you've been exposed, call the health department, call 211, follow the guidelines that they give you, and then reach out to Paula Tillison and let her know, and she could walk you through what's best for you in your case. But there are limits to leave and leave requirements, and we are going to follow federal guidelines. The new OMS recommendations that just came out had some leniency for softening of use of sick leave, and also we understand that right now when people are sick, if you're sick with something not even COVID related, it might be hard for you to get a doctor's note or a doctor's appointment. So we are ready and willing and knowing that there's going to be some lenience in there as long as there's not abuse of leave. So for those questions, hopefully everyone will stay healthy. Hopefully no one will have exposure. But if you do, please reach out to your supervisor and or Paula Tillison to answer your questions. And On that note, I remind you about private health information. These are some policies, some OJ policies on that. So, you know, we have to remember that if we have a coworker who is, you know, confided in us that they're positive or may be positive or exposed, that's not your job to then call everybody and tell everyone and post on Facebook and, you know, alert everyone to it. The health department has a tracing protocol, and CDC has a tracing protocol. They will make the, you know, the CDC, that person who has the actual health condition, and the CDC and Paula Tillison, HR, will make decisions on how and who to inform, because that is private health information and we shouldn't use that as gossip against our coworkers. These are some, I don't know if y'all have heard yet, but you're supposed to stay 6 feet away from people and wash your hands. But these are just some good looking graphics on that. Remember to keep yourself safe, just because tomorrow is May 1st. You know, COVID, the virus doesn't know tomorrow is May 1st. So it's still there without known treatment or a vaccine. So please remember to keep yourself safe. OMES has issued some guidelines today about cleaning of offices, so we will get them together for OJA and we will put those forth in line, and before we start opening those offices, we'll have a plan on how to do that safely. And that's Paula. Thank you again, Paula Christensen, for doing that slide. And Len, how do I exit end slideshow? Okay. Oh, I have. Okay, am I back in the meeting, Len?
Yeah, you're here.
Okay, sorry. So that's our plan. I know the governor's speaking right now. I hope he's not saying something too contrary to what I just said. But I, you know, was named interim director on March 7th. We lost a coworker on that day, and I thought that might be the worst thing that would happen to me. And it certainly is terrible, but this pandemic has been stressful. And so I want to thank the executive team that has been working with me through all of this planning. They're a part of creating this plan. They are the reason for this plan. And so Shelley Waller, she has the largest number of employees on telework. She's also in charge of detention and Lovely partners and our OAYS partners, and certainly Amanda and David and Laura have been working hard to keep our youth service agency partners informed and safe, and also Jeremy with his detention and Lovely partnerships, keeping them informed. So thank you, Shelley. Carol, I wrote fierce for her facilities. She loves her some Kojak and Swojak, misses her some Kojak and Swojak, and will always advocate for the health and safety of Kojak and Swojak, and I will always listen to her. And the goal is to always keep Carol happy. Janelle has been a rock star in continuing her partnerships with other agencies, and, you know, working with DMH and working on her boards to continue to represent OJA, continue to get training, and continue to get good things for our kids. Paula Tillison has been really very busy as HR, adjusting to this new world and constant questions and constant change daily, and so I appreciate her work on that. Len, who here has had Len help them on technology? Yeah. Thank you to Len and George and your team for keeping us able to telework. I appreciate that. Michael McNutt, Director of Communications, and Paula for making all my slides so pretty, but Michael McNutt for being my great advisor, always being honest in his editing and telling me when that idea probably isn't the best idea. Kevin Clegg, K-Money, been my partner in this, and, you know, you guys are aware that there's talk of budget cuts for FY21, and we won't know what those are until the legislature releases our budget, but there will be cuts, and I'm confident that Kevin Clegg, as he has done so many times, will see our agency through that, and that we will come up with a plan that's fair and that will address our core services and our core needs and keep our employees and kids operating. And Audrey, who I miss dearly, who also keeps me sane and keeps all my formats and questions and advice coming. Just wanted to, and then all of the employees who've just been so wonderful, keep doing the work that they're doing, keep in contact with their kids, keep their kids safe, keep answering questions and emails. And it was great to be, the reason why I wanted to do this Teams was because being on the Teams last week with Jenny and seeing all those people in the chat box, you know, it felt so good to have that shared experience with so many OJ people, because since I was named director, I haven't been able to share much time with many people because of COVID. So it felt good to all be together for that. I wanted to do this so we could all have this shared experience. I had this crazy idea that I would allow y'all to ask me questions and be open and transparent, and that's my goal as long as I'm director, to do that. And so I wanted to answer some questions that we had. Glenn, do we have any questions from the chat?
We do have one.
Okay.
For intake workers, conducting the intakes with families is proving difficult with office closures. Yeah. What are your thoughts on us being able to effectively perform our duties?
Okay, so the question's about JSU intake workers needing to do intakes, and I talked on a call with district supervisors, I think last week or 2 weeks ago on this. We do need to keep doing intakes. We can do it as much as you can over phone or over FaceTime. I'm told that you should be able to do it that way, by phone or FaceTime, without having to actually do face-to-face. On the Miranda, there's a question on Mirandize that you're not able to Mirandize them because it's not face-to-face. Legally, Miranda, either you're given your Mirandize, you're given the Miranda warning so that nothing can be used against you. So if a court of law or a defense attorney would just say that a Miranda over the phone was not legal, then whatever statements they said to us would not be able to use against them in a later court hearing. It doesn't keep us from filing charges or making intake decisions. So whoever is specifically asking this question, email me and include your DS and Shelley Waller on that, so we can see which, you know, we operate in 77 counties, so there's going to be 80 ways to do this, unfortunately, although I guess we have 4 counties that, well, you still do intakes. Anyway, we still, you know, there's going to be 80 different ways to do it, so really it's going to be individual, but our goal is to continue those intakes virtually until we're able to do it safely face-to-face. So Len, that was it for the chat questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm going to look at the questions that were anonymously emailed to the director. Okay, so one of the questions was about the exposure. If you're exposed to COVID, and what kind of leave would you take? I believe the plan addresses that, and if you don't feel, the question was, in the likely event that workers are exposed to a primary or secondary source of COVID, will be required to quarantine for 14 days? If so, will we go back on telework, be on sick leave, or administrative leave? So I think the plan addresses that, but if you are on telework and you think you've been exposed while out at the grocery store, as long as you're able to keep staying home and quarantine and telework, you would continue on telework. And that federal Relief Act has policies around time that you're only allowed to take 80 hours off up until December 31st. So if you need some, there is allowance for time for you to go get doctor's appointment and tested and then return back to work if you're cleared. So between the plan and Paula Tillison, it's, you know, I can only answer that question generally, and hopefully you won't need to ever ask that question for real to Paula Tillison, but some of it is case by case. Question or comment that a secure care facility employee feels that the reason that secure care is able to keep safe, one of the reasons is that those visits from families are currently suspended, and that they would like to see it continue to be suspended. We plan to keep those suspended at least through June 1, probably June 30th. And again, those visits with families will not come back, you know, families will not return back for face-to-face visits until Carol Miller and Superintendent Mascot and Superintendent Norvell feel that the facility is ready for it. and until we could put safeguards into it. But the best way to keep that suspension is to keep those virtual visits, keep those telephone calls, keep those kids feeling that they're still engaged with their families and their JSU workers and their mentors and whoever they need to be engaged with. We can keep suspending it as long as they feel like they are still getting the visits, but we will not reinstate those visits until we can do so safely. Next question on childcare being a significant issue for myself. What resources, recommendations, assistance will be offered to OJ staff? So I think this question is about, you know, our kids are now out of school, at least probably till the fall, and our spouse might not be able to stay home, or, you know, schedules have changed. The Department of Human Services is regularly changing daycare updates. I know that they are waiving copays for certain people that qualify. They are trying to extend hours and giving allowances for essential workers. You in Secure Care have been deemed an essential worker, so I don't have the specific answer to that question because that would be for DHS daycare to answer, but you should have some relief in the daycare, in both getting into daycare and perhaps some relief around copays through DHS. So I advise you to contact the DHS website and their hotline to get that information specifically, because I'm not an expert in that. Also, and a follow-up on that question was, for those of us in secure facility, we don't have access to our cell phones in order to contact our children that are in daycare. And I have texted Carol Miller about that. And I asked her if we can come up with a policy to allow, this is the text message. I said, may I say we will work on a plan for Secure Care staff to have cell phones in a break room for daycare purposes. And Carol Miller says, yes, ma'am. Also, they can have a break to go check their cell phones, but that is more traffic in our facility. So I like a phone in the break room. So look to Carol Miller and the superintendents to work on a plan to make you feel that way, feel safe about having your child in daycare. That I understand 8 hours. When I go into and visit Kojak and Swojak, I text my husband, go into a secure facility, I'll be out of pocket. And certainly if you have a child in daycare, they usually want to be able to get to you. Hopefully you'll be able to provide your daycare with the number to control. And I know that on each unit, there is a phone for you to call out if you need to check in. Maybe check into your phone for your messages. But yes, we will, Carol and the superintendents will figure out a way to make you feel comfortable about your children. Also on that question, they said, not all of us in secure facilities have access to email or Teams in order to receive the information. Len, I'm going to punt to you.
Thank you. So all email accounts are set up for every employee when their new hire paperwork is done. We will make sure that we follow up with every employee to make sure they understand how to access their email and also how to access Teams.
Thank you, Len. And I've also talked to Carol, who I think is supposed to talk to Len, and I am willing and able to do a meeting with Swojak, with Kojak, with both at the same time, with several shifts. I'm willing to make myself available to as many employees that want to have a meeting. So it also gets me dressed and out of the house. So any meetings I can have will help my health. So that's answered the question. Will the previous positions that were posted be filled? This will likely be case by case. I know a lot of them are JSU positions. A lot of them are necessary, are in the roadmap for JSU, but we will, now that we're at telework, we're in a different world, our numbers in juvenile justice are down, but that's not, they will return. We'll be, I'm sure Kevin and Paula Tilson and Shelley will work on those positions. Secure care positions will continue to be needed because we have a need to keep the positions filled in order to meet our ratio goals and our safety goals. But those JSU positions that were posted, you know, were needed in the roadmap, and so we'll have to look at whether they'll still be able to be filled after the FY21 budget comes out. Stay tuned for that. I wish I had a better answer, but I know Shelley Waller will advocate for those positions, and Kevin Clegg will fill them as best we can for budget purposes. To telework, will each worker have a state cell phone? Len, do you want to answer this question?
So this question has come up before. Some employees have chosen that they only want to carry one cell phone, but we are going to revisit this with the district supervisors and discuss for those employees that do want to have an agency cell phone. We will work out a plan on how to get those submittals in and look at the budget to make sure we can take care of those.
Okay. So if you would like a state cell phone, talk to your DS, make that request. We'll make that request to Lynn, and hopefully we'll be able to accommodate you. I know it's a lot to ask for if you just have one cell phone and your kids need it and you need it and you don't want to give it out to the families. And we could probably send out some more information on, you know, blocking calls and how to call into your state phone, if your office phone, if that's can relieve any of that. But I understand that issue. I've been carrying 2 cell phones for 4 years now. It's a pain, but it keeps my life separate, I think. And last question, what happens if a worker is not meeting expected tasks? Do we extend their agreement? And I think I addressed that when I went through that. So if there are workers, hopefully they will know who they are, that are not meeting the expectations of the telework agreement, I ask the supervisors meet with them tomorrow or early next week and let that be known and set some new expectations and give those workers about a week or, you know, up until May 15th to come into compliance. And if the workers can't come into compliance, perhaps if whoever the district supervisor is in that, whoever the district supervisor and if it's Shelley Waller and Paula Tilson can help us on whether we can come to an agreement for continued telework or whether we'll have to make office arrangements for workers. So that's the answer I have for that. And those are all the questions that we had.
We've had several come in while you've been talking.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, the first question, it appears as though the site team will follow telehealth guidelines for level E and detention youth until further notice. However, does this also apply for certifications as well? I have not felt a push from courts to continue testing as of yet.
The certification studies for YOs, I think is the question.
Yes.
So Jennifer Mitten recently gave me, or I think Dr. Schaller gave me, there's about 13 pending. And I did a webinar with DAs on Tuesday and asked that if any of them had YOs pending to try as best they can to make a plea agreement as a YO so that we wouldn't need to do a certification study. But yes, Dr. Schaller and Jennifer Mitten have told me that they are ready probably next week to go back into detention centers. You know, they'll follow precautions and masks and begin the process of psychological evaluations. But I ask, I know one county has 5 out of the 13. I ask if you have those YOs, and I'll probably go through that list too. And you or I can reach out to the DA about trying to just plead those as a YO and not require a certification study. That'd be best. But we are going to start on those studies next week, is my understanding. And if I'm wrong and Jennifer or Paul are on this call and want to yell at Len, he can stop me from that answer.
The next question is really more of a clarification from an earlier statement. So the Miranda does not have to be signed if the youth does waive rights and agrees to make an intake statement.
Well, if we're able to do the electronic signature, right, Len? I know that we're setting up e-signs.
Yes, we do have the ability to do that if they want to send those out.
Yeah, so try to do that. First step would be to try to do it through an e-sign. If you can't get that e-sign set up through them and you can say, do you waive that? Then just write on the form, they waived it by phone on this date, and submit that to your DA. I mean, we got to keep these moving forward, and there has to be some allowance for the new normal.
Next question, any estimate on when youth who have been in the community will resume being placed at facilities?
That's a good question. Well, if they're in the community, the reason not to place them into facilities would be because of health concerns, because we can't be sure where they've been for the past 2 weeks or whether or not they're COVID positive. I know that in some cases when kids are allowed to wait in the community for a bed and are able to do well in the community, we're able to just waive that bed once it becomes available and keep them in the community, because the goal should always be to keep kids in the community. But I know that now with social distancing and not having us be able to do face-to-face contact with them, not having them in school, not being able to drug test them, it's more difficult to tell whether or not a kid's being good in the community. We're not ready to put those kids into facilities yet. Hopefully with increased testing, if we are able, and I think we're getting close to do COVID testing to get it for kids that are not symptomatic, that don't have a doctor's notes, that can do it safely, and we're able to get a COVID test that's negative, then we could have consideration about placing. But this would be case-by-case basis. Certainly staff it with your district supervisor, and whether or not the kid needs to be placed is able to be maintained in the community. But I think as testing becomes available and we can show that a kid is not COVID positive, we'd feel more comfortable about putting them into the system. But until we are able to get those tests or able to get results back soon, we're not there yet.
Next question. After everything with COVID-19 settles down, will teleworking position dependent be a possibility a few times a week/month?
Yes, yes. So OMES has been telling us that telework is here to stay even past COVID. We're going to be able to get, it's just, even though it's being pushed by a pandemic, our state has shown, our workers, especially OJ workers, have shown they're able to do it. I think it'll be even easier to do once, for our JSU workers, you're able to go to court, you're able to meet with kids, you're able to spend a few hours at the office to do those meetings or meet them at the library or whatever you can figure out. Yes, our OJ was looking at teleworking, and we have a couple counties that were on traditional telework before this, and we will continue with telework after this, and we will, when the nation and our state recovers from COVID, we will have, I think, a lot more of our employees remaining on telework than returning to offices. And this just, if telework is something that you like and that you think you're able to do, showing your ability to do that will help in future decisions of whether or not you're able to.
Will juveniles who discharge from secure care facilities be able to go to step down or level E facilities?
Yes, and we've had, I think since this pandemic, Shelley or Carol can pop up if I'm wrong. Since this pandemic, I know we've had at least 1 or 2 kids that have stepped down. Yes, there are kids that have been stepped down, and we will continue to look at step downs for kids.
Okay, the next question. Can we use the same telework form and just have the employee initial the form with the new date?
You know what, I saw Lee Fry today, and hi Lee, and I was telling him, you ready for all the new telework agreements? And he has to file, he and Monique and our HR have to file each of the old ones and then each of the new ones. So as long as Paula Tillison allows me, I think we could figure out a way between now and May 15th to just write over it, or just remotely or by email extend them all to June 30th and not have to redo a second paperwork. But I certainly want a meeting between supervisor and worker to just remind everyone of expectations and whether they've been met. And maybe there's new things that they want to work on in this time. I had lots of plans for all the downtime I was going to have while teleworking. I was going to rewrite Title 10A, the Youthful Offender Act, all of our administrative code, and I just haven't gotten there yet. Haven't had that downtime, but hopefully you will. But yes, I will get an answer to that from Paula Tilson about how we can do that without having too much paperwork.
What if your primary office is separate from the lobby and there is a glass partition between? Can we do intakes that way? Only one family in AM, one in PM, and clean in between.
Yes, and Shelley Waller, along with her DSOs, came up with specific ways to do that safely. And she submitted that ahead of me publishing this plan, but I just felt because it was so JSU specific and because we weren't ready to pull the trigger on face-to-face contact visits, you know, this week, I did not publish it in this plan. But those, and because each office is going to be different in the way they're set up, in how many OJ employees are in there, and how many intakes they do. And so those kind of specific questions about offices will be addressed by Shelley and the DS, and we'll probably put out those JSU specific guidelines either Friday or Monday with a timeline.
Okay, more questions are coming in. Is there going to be a document sent out regarding the intake and new process we will use? In our county, the families have very limited resources in regards to scanning, etc., which makes it difficult to obtain the needed signatures on intake documents.
Right, and I think, like I said, yeah, each county is going to vary by the way they're set up, by the needs of their community, by the numbers of intakes they have, and also by what the intake worker, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say every intake worker, you have got to go to work tomorrow and start meeting face-to-face with kids, because I know some intake workers are vulnerable or have vulnerable family members or have kids. That doesn't make that possible. So it's going to be case by case based on the county and the worker and the DS. But again, I think we could do those intakes remotely in the time, but I have Shelley and the DSs will have a plan for JSU by Monday to address those individual questions. Thanks, Shelley.
What about youth who are pending placement in detention?
I don't understand the question of pending placement in detention. I know that our detention numbers when we started were 240, I think, on March 18th, and yesterday we got as low as 109, and now we're back to 125 yesterday. But pending placement in detention, right now, still detention centers and congregate care, you know, there's still no cure, there's still no vaccine, the virus is still there, so we still want to limit the number of kids in detention, just because if it hits detention, it's going to hit everybody. And that's what all the states are doing. That's, you know, not my plan, that's not Oklahoma's plan, that's what every state in the country is doing. They're lowering detention populations. And so we have asked judges to just have new intakes for kids that actually need to be there for violent felony crimes or because they are a danger to themselves or to the public. So I guess I would need more clarification on why a kid would be pending to go to detention if they didn't pick up a new violent crime. Whatever that question is, if that individual question is, you can either clarify it on the chat or you can email me and Shelley separately.
Any suggestions when an ankle bracelet needs to be restrapped? Example, it has come off and they need to put it back on. How would we handle that with social distancing?
I don't know enough about the GPS units. I think Jennifer Thatcher would probably be the one to answer this, but if the ankle strap is off and you're not able to talk them through it, and you, I mean, are we able to get Shelley to answer this? Len, is she able to talk? Because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you have some sort of strap violation with your GPS monitor, be sure and contact Jennifer Thatcher. She's going to be able to be the one who can walk you through that. In the event we do have to put a GPS monitor on a kid again, I would encourage our staff to wear masks, to have gloves on, you know, and to just maintain that social distancing to the best of your ability. I would also request that the kid cover his face with something if they don't have a face mask, but just so that we're not breathing on top of one another.
Thank you, Shelley.
One final question. In regards to electronic signatures specifically for intakes, how many days in advance do we need to send the request in before doing the intake virtually? Example, we normally go through all our forms at one time, but would this way mean signatures would occur prior to actually talking to new clients?
Len, do you understand that question?
I believe I do, and I'll try to answer. So I don't think there would be anything in any specific number of days to send them in. When we get the request, they usually go out within a few hours. So if you schedule the intake, we could have them to the individuals, you know, within a few hours of that. So if you want to follow up with that question with me, I'll be glad to see if I can answer it if that didn't take care of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Len. Hopefully that'll answer it. And again, there's some, you know, if you're able to do those intakes virtually and over the phone and get those signatures, I think we just have to have grace on our process. We just have to know that our process is going to look a little differently. Signatures might come before, might come after, or might be you signing off on behalf of the kid. As long as we just get that intake done and moved on to the DA for them to make the filing decisions, I think there's grace in it not being done the way it's always done before. And if there's anything, if the Miranda is not done correctly, or if the kid didn't feel like he knew his rights, then eventually he'll have a defense attorney to raise those issues, and the judge can make a determination on that with the defense attorney.
So I think we have a follow-up to the earlier question about youth who are pending placement in detention.
Okay.
Youth who are currently in detention and awaiting a district review and placement to level E.
Currently in detention, waiting district review and placement to level E. We're still doing placements. So the district review should be scheduled to occur remotely, and then that placement will still occur. If you saw, Rex has got the placement list down to 2 kids this as of today. So if the kid is home waiting a district, Lynette said the kid's in detention waiting a district review, right?
Correct.
Okay, then you should do the district review remotely and keep the process moving.
And that's the last question.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you for all that you do every day. And please know that my goal is to be open and transparent and make you feel like you're heard and like you understand what is going on. And I've got great people working with me to help get that done. If you have any questions ever about anything, you know my cell phone and my email. So reach out to me if you didn't want to do it in a public forum, if you have a follow-up, or if you didn't understand what I said. But thank you to everyone for joining. I hope to make this at least a monthly event, and certainly if we have any major updates, to do it again. But hope this answered questions and relieves any anxiety or questions. And everyone stay safe and be well. Thank you.